She swept floors in silence, while Ivy League geniuses walked past her like she didn't exist. But when a viral video exposed her scribbling equations that could rewrite global math theory, the internet exploded. And the man who mocked her, he stole her work decades ago. Now, she's back in the same lecture hall, holding a mop, and the truth. But what she's about to reveal will destroy more than just his career. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun had just slipped behind the towers of Jefferson Clark University, casting long golden shadows across the marble courtyard. This was the hour when professors left, and janitors arrived. The quiet shift change that no one talked about but everyone noticed. Students hurried across campus in hoodies and headphones, their minds still humming with lectures and lab results, while custodians emerged from the basements and side doors like ghosts summoned to reset the day. Among them was Martha Green. She walked with a rhythm born from decades of routine. Her cart squeaked on one wheel, and her gray uniform hung loosely around her frame, blending her into the background as if the fabric itself was meant to erase her. 57 years old, widowed and barely acknowledged by the faculty she cleaned up after, Martha had long learned the power of silence. But what nobody knew, what no one cared to ask, was that behind her tired eyes and slow gait was a mind as sharp and restless as the chalk dust she swept each night. That evening, she arrived earlier than usual to Lecture Hall B3, the largest in the mathematics department. A half-finished lecture had been scrawled across the whiteboards, complex variables and symbols sprawling like a battlefield of ideas. She moved her mop aside, stared at the equations, and picked up a dry marker that someone had left behind. Her fingers trembled, not from nerves but from electricity. She began writing. Martha didn't just solve problems. She felt them. The numbers sang to her. Theorems became rivers of logic that she could cross blindfolded. That night, the proof she'd been revisiting for decades, the one that haunted her since the summer of 1987, took shape in her hand. The Riemann hypothesis, still unsolved, had always whispered to her, and now it was screaming. She lost track of time. The room fell silent around her, as if the universe itself held its breath. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dr. Malcolm Prescott, chair of the mathematics department, had returned to retrieve his forgotten satchel. At 63, he wore his academic arrogance like a tailored suit. Tenure had fossilized his curiosity, but not his ego. As he stepped inside the hall, he froze at the sight. There, under the soft buzz of fluorescent light, stood the janitor, her uniform smudged, her hair tied back, scribbling fiercely across the same board where he had fumbled hours earlier. Her posture wasn't tentative. It was commanding. The marker moved like it obeyed her. He cleared his throat loudly. Martha turned, startled. The marker slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a soft click. There was a pause, a long one, and then he laughed. It wasn't the laugh of confusion or surprise. It was sharp, cruel, the kind of laugh that cuts bone. His voice echoed, bouncing off concrete and chalkboard. Well, he sneered, walking slowly toward her. It's good to know my lectures are finally reaching the janitorial staff. Martha bent to pick up the marker. She said nothing. You know, Prescott continued, circling her like a lion circling prey, that board's not for recreational doodling, especially not by help. The insult wasn't subtle. It was measured, delivered with surgical precision. He didn't need to shout. Racism at Jefferson Clark had never been loud. It wore elbow patches and Oxford shoes. Martha straightened her back. Her eyes didn't waver. I was just cleaning, she said softly. I thought I'd leave it better than I found it. Prescott blinked. Her tone was even. Too even. He looked back at the whiteboard and squinted at what she had written. Lines of notation that didn't resemble his earlier scrawls at all. His eyes narrowed. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, dense, elegant. I hope you didn't touch my work, he snapped. I didn't, Martha replied. Yours ended at the second line. I started below it. Prescott's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to the board, reading it again. Slower this time. His brows knit. What he saw didn't compute. It wasn't just mathematically sound. It was original. A leap beyond anything he had tried. But the idea that she had written it was inconceivable. No credentials, no degree. A mop in one hand, and a fantasy in the other. It had to be some trick, coincidence, plagiarism. He stepped back, face contorting between disbelief and indignation. "Don't let me catch you defacing departmental property again," he said coldly. "Or we'll have a problem." Martha nodded once, not in agreement, but in dismissal. She returned to her cart, wheeled it quietly toward the exit, and didn't look back. Prescott stood in the center of the room, staring at the board. He took a photo of the equations with his phone, then furiously erased them with the side of his hand until only his own broken logic remained. Down the hall, unnoticed by either of them, a security camera blinked red. Later that night, as silence settled over the dorms, freshman Elijah Carter wandered into Lecture Hall B3. The door had been left ajar, and his curiosity pulled him in like gravity. He was a first-year math major, still wide-eyed, still hopeful. Being one of the few black students in the program, he often stayed late to work undisturbed. But tonight he wasn't looking for quiet, he was looking for inspiration. He found it lying in a trash bin near the front desk. A crumpled sheet of paper, with equations hastily jotted in blue ink. It looked like a rewrite of something from the board. His fingers tingled as he unfolded it. He froze. What he held wasn't student work. It wasn't even undergraduate level. It was revolutionary. Concepts he had only brushed against in books were laid out with stunning clarity. It was the beginning of a proof to the Riemann hypothesis, or something astonishingly close. He stared at the paper, then at the empty board, then back at the paper. It didn't make sense.
Who would leave something this valuable in the trash?
And then he noticed the faint smudge of cleaning fluid on the paper's corner. His pulse quickened. He ran his fingers over the ink again, heart racing, and whispered to himself, This isn't Prescott's. Because deep down, he knew. He'd seen Dr. Prescott's lectures. They were verbose, conservative, cautious. This was bold, different, genius. And it didn't come from the department head. It came from someone who wasn't supposed to be thinking like this at all. Elijah turned toward the door, clutching the paper, unaware that the janitor who wrote it was just down the hall, wiping away the last traces of her brilliance. Elijah Carter couldn't sleep. He lay on his dorm room bed, the crumpled sheet from the trash bin smoothed out beside him, illuminated by the soft light of his desk lamp. His roommate had already dozed off, headphones in, twitching to a beat only he could hear. But Elijah's mind was racing, not with confusion, but with certainty. What he had found earlier wasn't just interesting, it was paradigm-breaking. The math flowed with an elegance and intuition he hadn't seen even in the most respected texts. Whoever had written it didn't just understand advanced mathematics, they commanded it. And yet, it had no signature, no stamp, no glory. The idea that someone, anyone, could casually discard something so brilliant gnawed at him. He held the paper up again, scanning the strange loops, the tight clusters of symbols, the sideways thinking that danced along the margins. "This isn't Prescott," he muttered aloud. There was no question. The department chair's approach was meticulous but stiff. Elijah had suffered through 2 of his lectures already, each one a slow, exhausting trudge through outdated frameworks and self-congratulatory tangents. No, this work was nimble, daring. It moved like jazz. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He knew what he wanted to do. He needed to do it. There was something sacred in what he'd found, and hiding it felt like sin. But exposure, that was risky too. What if the university claimed it as their own? What if someone accused him of fabrication? He stared at the paper again. No name, no author, just pure, naked brilliance. He snapped a photo. A few minutes later, Elijah posted the image on his anonymous math forum account. No name, no tags, just one caption. "The real genius walks these halls with a mop." He hit post and closed the laptop. By sunrise, everything had changed. He awoke to the sound of buzzes, beeps, and a flurry of messages that wouldn't stop. His phone was lighting up like a slot machine, notifications stacked on top of one another. Twitter, Reddit, Discord, Instagram. His DMs were packed. The original post had been shared over 12,000 times overnight. Major science accounts were commenting. Theories were flying. Who wrote this? Is this real math or performance art? Looks like a breakthrough in prime distribution. This isn't undergrad level. This is postdoc territory. Someone check if the Clay Institute's sweating. Elijah's heart pounded. Somewhere between his first class and the dining hall, his post made it to mainstream media. A screenshot appeared on a viral meme page with 3 million followers. The caption changed slightly. "She cleans your floors, and solves your future. Within hours, campus was buzzing. Students whispered in the lecture halls. Professors side-eyed each other in elevators. Screens lit up with the now iconic image of the crumpled math page. Theories swirled. Some insisted it was an elaborate hoax, others swore it had to be the work of a reclusive math genius. A few hinted that it was AI generated. No one, not even Elijah, expected the answer. Down in the custodial break room, Martha Green was wiping her hands on a paper towel when she heard it. It came through the static of a wall-mounted television tuned to the university's local news channel. The anchor spoke quickly, excitedly, gesturing toward a screenshot over her shoulder, and in what students are calling a mysterious mathematical miracle. The image posted last night has now gone viral. Thousands are asking, who wrote it, and why is no one taking credit? Martha froze. Her eyes moved to the screen. For a moment her face remained unreadable. Not surprise. Not fear. Something deeper. A memory stirred. She reached for her bag slowly. Her hands, usually so steady, now trembled ever so slightly. She knew that paper. Knew every line. She had written it nearly blindfolded. The product of 20 years of private obsession, years of silence and buried brilliance. She had thrown it away. She hadn't meant to. It must have fallen off her cart. She had assumed it was lost, forgotten. Now it was everywhere. She turned away from the screen. Her chest tightened, not in panic, but in the terrifying awareness that a secret long buried had clawed its way to the surface. By that afternoon, the university administration convened behind closed doors. No public statements had been issued, no acknowledgments. But the mathematics department was in disarray. Professors whispered about the viral post in their lounges. Assistants scoured departmental archives for signs of plagiarism, hoping to identify the author before the media did. Prescott sat in his office, eyes fixed on his screen. He recognized it immediately. The math from last night. Her math. Only now, it had become a wildfire. He leaned back in his chair, trying to reframe the situation. If he acted quickly, he could spin it, dismiss it as a prank, maybe even suggest that a student had left the paper. But the caption, that damned caption. The real genius walks these halls with a mop. His jaw clenched. He knew what it meant. Someone was drawing a line straight to Martha. And if they followed it far enough, they'd reach the night he laughed. And the board he wiped clean in haste. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. It was Dean Strickland, a tall, silver-haired administrator, with a permanent look of disapproval and a knack for public relations. "Malcolm," she said, stepping in, "we need to talk." Prescott stiffened.
About what?
She shut the door behind her. About the math, about the janitor, and about what the board wants to do before this becomes a PR nightmare. He swallowed hard. "We want an investigation," she continued. "How did classified research, if that's what it is, end up in a viral post with a quote about custodial staff? Was it leaked, stolen, fabricated?" "I have no idea," Prescott lied smoothly. "But I agree, it needs looking into." Strickland narrowed her eyes. "I need to know if you erased anything from that board last night." He paused, then shook his head slowly. "Nothing worth remembering," he said. She didn't buy it. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in the back of the university's computer lab, now regretting the post more than he expected. His inbox was overflowing. News outlets wanted interviews. Strangers sent him articles from international science journals, now referencing his image. He kept replaying one thought: who did this? He wasn't content to let it go. And something deep in his gut whispered the truth he hadn't dared believe. The writing wasn't anonymous. It was invisible, because no one ever thought to look in the places where genius hides in plain sight. He opened his email and typed a name into the staff directory. Martha Green, Custodial Services.
Her photo appeared. Soft eyes. Worn face. A hint of defiance buried under fatigue.
He stared at the image for a long time, then whispered, "It was you, wasn't it?" But even as students celebrated the anonymous author, and math blogs speculated on the elegance of the proof, a storm was brewing behind the university's polished doors. Memos were exchanged. Logs were checked. Internal security footage, including the camera in Lecture Hall B3, was quietly requested by administrators. And within one of those logs was the precise timestamp showing Prescott re-entering the hall. It also showed him staring at the board and wiping it clean. A digital paper trail was forming. But before anyone could connect the dots, a confidential report landed on Dean Strickland's desk, flagged urgent. The report contained something no one expected. The proof on the paper matched elements of an unfinished research proposal Prescott had submitted 2 years ago, a proposal that was rejected for being mathematically incoherent. The board demanded answers, not just about how the janitor got access, but how her math fixed a flaw that Prescott had failed to see. Elijah Carter sat in the library archives, the glow of the microfilm screen illuminating his face like moonlight through prison bars. He wasn't supposed to be there. Access to the university's old math research journals had been restricted since the incident went viral, but he had quietly befriended the night shift librarian over a few well-placed questions and late-night study sessions. She didn't ask what he was searching for. She just handed him the key. What Elijah was looking for couldn't be found in textbooks. He was searching for a ghost. After 2 sleepless nights, following the explosion of his anonymous post, Elijah had become obsessed, not with the fame, but with the truth. The equations on that sheet weren't just random brilliance. They had voice, purpose, personality. The work carried the unmistakable fingerprint of someone who had lived inside math for decades. But when he'd run Martha's name through every academic database he could find, nothing came up. Not a single paper, not even a conference mention. It didn't make sense. If she was as brilliant as her work suggested, she had to have been somewhere before. So he went analog. Slide after slide, clicked beneath the microfilm lens, as he scanned obscure journals from the 1980s. Hours passed. His fingers were cramping. His eyes burned. But then in the Cambridge Mathematics Review, dated 1986, something made him freeze. There on page 47 was a paper titled Advanced Prime Field Distribution, Hypotheses and Peripheral Constants. Author M.G. Ellison. The writing style. It was identical. That same bold leapfrogging through logical terrain. The same voice. Elijah leaned forward, squinting at the microprint. The paper wasn't credited to any university department. No bio, no affiliations. Just a mailing address. A P.O. box in Massachusetts. Ellison. His mind whirred. Martha Green. M.G. Could Ellison have been a pseudonym? And why would someone hide behind a fake name to publish something so revolutionary? He printed the paper and tucked it carefully into his bag. He needed to know more. Across campus, Martha sat quietly on the break room bench, her lunch untouched. Her coworkers laughed a few tables away, sharing stories and gripes about broken vacuums and cold vending machine coffee. But Martha was somewhere else. Her mind trapped in a memory she thought she'd buried for good. Fall. Cambridge. She was 19. A prodigy. The first black woman accepted into MIT's elite theoretical mathematics program in over a decade. She remembered the dorm room, the early mornings, the way professors marveled, at first at how she dismantled equations that had baffled entire departments. But admiration curdled into suspicion. Compliments became side-eyes. Her fellow students, all white and mostly male, didn't believe her proofs were hers. Rumors began to spread that she was cheating, that someone was helping her. The final straw came during an advanced number theory exam. A student named Thomas Ledbetter, son of a tenured MIT dean, accused her of plagiarism, claimed her results mirrored a restricted faculty-only research draft. It wasn't true, but the university didn't ask questions. She was suspended pending investigation and told to vacate her dorm within 48 hours. No formal hearing, no opportunity to appeal. Martha never returned. She left Boston broken, her academic record stained, her scholarships rescinded. But her mind, that never dulled. The math still lived in her, and she kept writing. In the years that followed, she worked factory shifts, cleaned houses, and eventually landed at Jefferson Clark through a temp agency. It was supposed to be temporary. That was 23 years ago. She exhaled now, staring at her untouched sandwich. Even with the world discovering her again, she feared the past wouldn't stay buried. If people started digging, if they found out about MIT, about the expulsion, about Ellis, they wouldn't see her as a genius. They'd see her as a fraud. Again, Elijah's next move was bold. He emailed the editor of the Cambridge Mathematics Review, framing it as a research inquiry for a college project. He asked about the mysterious M.G. Ellison, and whether the journal had ever received additional papers from them. The editor replied within hours. Dear Elijah, we received one manuscript from M.G. Ellison in 1986, and never heard from them again. The paper was delivered in person, dropped in our office mailbox. No phone number, no return info, except a P.O. box. Quite brilliant, though. One of our rare anonymous publications. Elijah's stomach flipped. It had to be her. But he needed confirmation. He returned to the library, scanning local government records for the 1980s. After a few false starts, he found a Massachusetts tax filing tied to that same P.O. box. It listed the filer's full name, Martha Green Ellison. His chest tightened. It wasn't a pseudonym. It was her real name. Ellison was her maiden name. She had dropped it, buried it, sometime after. Now he had proof. The woman mopping lecture halls had once written a paper that math journals still quietly reference today, yet had never credited her because she never published again. He sat back in his chair, dazed. Then, a new realization hit him. If she'd published once, what else had she written? Back in the math department, Dr. Prescott was unraveling. Though outwardly composed, his private world was crumbling. The internal probe had already raised questions he couldn't answer. The board had reviewed his old rejected proposal and flagged disturbing similarities with the viral proof. He insisted it was coincidence, parallel thinking. But an audit of his files showed he'd never logged the version now circulating online. And worse, its logs confirmed that on the night the proof was written on the whiteboard, Martha had been assigned to clean the hall, not him. There was only one explanation. She had written it. And now, people were starting to believe it. Prescott knew his position was slipping, so he did what men like him always did when cornered. He began rewriting history. He told colleagues in hushed tones that she had seen his notes, that he had been mentoring her in secret, that she misunderstood his generosity as her own discovery. A few nodded. Most didn't, because they had started seeing what Elijah already knew. Martha wasn't copying brilliance. She was brilliance. That evening, Elijah returned to the janitor's lounge. Martha was there, sipping tea, staring at nothing. He approached gently, holding a folder of printouts. "I found your paper," he said softly. She blinked, startled. "The one from 1986, he continued. "Published under Ellison. That was your name, right?" She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. "Why didn't you keep publishing?" he asked. She looked down at her tea. "They made sure I couldn't." He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. "Don't be," she replied. "You can't lose what was never allowed to exist." Elijah handed her the folder. "You exist now," he said, "and the world's watching." She looked at the pages, her own words, her own equations, proof of what she had once been, and still was. Her hands trembled again, but this time, not from fear, from fire. Elijah flipped to the final page of the research packet, and froze. One more paper, never published, signed with the same name, and the date was last year. Martha had been writing in secret all along. The campus library was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic clack of Elijah's keyboard. Stacks of old journals surrounded him, forming a paper fortress of forgotten minds. Martha's rediscovered identity as MJ. Ellison had ignited something deep in him, not just curiosity, but indignation. He'd spent the past 3 nights digging into archives, tracing citations, and following mathematical breadcrumbs through decades of academic literature. It didn't take long to find the connection. The 1986 paper, Advanced Prime Field Distribution, Hypotheses and Peripheral Constants, had been cited 3 times in its first year. Each reference came from obscure graduate research, tucked away in the corners of mathematical academia. But after that, the trail went cold. Then, suddenly, it reappeared in 1992, under a different name. A new paper, On the Boundaries of Prime Field Limitations, published by Dr. Peter H. Wallace of Harvard University, mirrored Martha's exact framework. It wasn't just influenced, it was lifted. Whole equations, structures and notations, replicated line for line, except for small cosmetic changes to make it look original. Wallace's paper became legendary. It was credited as the groundwork for modern prime distribution analysis, the seed that led to several award-winning studies. He'd won the Franklin Medal for Mathematical Innovation 2 years later. And Martha? Her name had been erased. Elijah leaned back in his chair, stunned. His fingers trembled over the mouse as he compared both documents side by side. There was no doubt, the math wasn't inspired. It was theft, clean, clinical, and buried under prestige. His breath caught in his throat. He looked up the year Wallace had received the medal. 1994, the same year Martha had taken the janitorial job at Jefferson Clark. A coincidence? Or something more? He needed proof, not conjecture. He scrolled to the acknowledgments section of Wallace's paper, hoping for some clue. There it was, a brief mention that made his pulse stop. Special thanks to MGE, whose early drafts influenced the structural direction of this proof. MG. Martha Green Ellison. No full name, no co-authorship, just an ambiguous initial buried in academic politeness. A line that meant nothing to readers but everything to the man stealing her work. Elijah sat back, the air around him heavy. The betrayal wasn't subtle. It was systemic. The kind that happened when a world convinced itself genius couldn't come from someone like her. She had built something beautiful, and someone else had claimed it. He thought about Martha, how she spoke quietly, how she walked as if shrinking from a world that never wanted her brilliance seen. Now he understood why. He opened his notebook and began writing. Not equations this time, but names, dates, connections. He was mapping theft. He needed a timeline, something he could show her, something undeniable. But as he dug deeper, he found something even stranger. Wallace's personal research assistant during the late 1980s and early 1990s had been none other than a visiting PhD candidate from Jefferson Clark University. The name was faintly familiar. He looked closer. Dr. Malcolm Prescott. Across campus, in the math building's upper wing, Prescott's office light burned late into the night. He sat rigidly at his desk, surrounded by piles of old manuscripts, attempting to rewrite his own history. The pressure had become suffocating. Students whispered when he passed. Faculty meetings fell silent when he entered. He told himself he was still in control. He wasn't. He reread the internal report again, the one that compared his old research proposal to the viral equations. Every variable aligned too perfectly. The board hadn't accused him outright, but the implication was clear. Someone else had done your work, Malcolm. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. For the first time in years, he saw not authority but fear. He opened an old locked drawer, removing a yellowed folder labeled Ellison, MG. Inside were faded photocopies of a thesis draft, handwritten notes, and a grainy black and white photo of a young black woman smiling at a math conference podium. The sight of her name written so neatly, Martha Green Ellison, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, sent a tremor through him. He had kept this file for 30 years. He told himself it was out of academic interest. But the truth was uglier. He had met her once briefly, at a conference in 1985, back when she was a rising prodigy. He remembered her clarity, her confidence, her ability to reduce complex theorems to childlike simplicity. It had unnerved him. He hadn't been the brightest in the room that day. She had been. Later, when he joined Wallace's Harvard Research Circle, her name reappeared in whispers. The expelled student, the troublemaker. Then, one afternoon, Wallace had shown him a set of brilliant equations, without attribution. Someone left these drafts in the review pile. Wallace had said casually. No name attached. Raw, but incredible. Prescott had recognized the notation, Ellison's unique shorthand. He said nothing. Because in that moment, silence was more convenient than honesty. Now, decades later, that silence had come to collect. Meanwhile, Elijah stood in front of Martha's cleaning cart near the faculty elevator. The evening air hummed with tension as he approached her. Martha, he said softly, holding the two papers out. You need to see this. She looked at him confused, until her eyes fell on the documents. The first was her 1986 paper. The second, Wallace's. She read slowly, lips parting as the realization dawned. Her handwriting, her logic, her stolen words. Her hands began to shake. I knew it, she whispered. I knew someone took it, but I couldn't prove it. Elijah leaned against the wall, anger simmering under his voice. It wasn't just someone. Prescott worked with him. Her eyes lifted sharply. Prescott? He was Wallace's assistant when the second paper came out. Martha looked down again, her expression unreadable. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, Of course he was. Elijah frowned. You knew him? Her silence answered for her. In 1985, she had presented at the National Mathematics Symposium in Chicago. Her paper on prime field distribution had drawn quiet admiration. After her talk, a young man, thin, neatly dressed, with an easy academic arrogance, approached her. You think too abstractly, he'd told her, half compliment, half insult. Mathematics needs restraint. His name was Malcolm Prescott. He had smiled when she countered his critique, but his eyes had betrayed irritation. That kind of brilliance, coming from a young black woman, didn't sit well with him. She hadn't thought of that encounter in decades. Until now, and suddenly, everything clicked. The theft, the timing, the smirk when he'd laughed at her in the lecture hall weeks ago. It wasn't new. It was recognition. He had known exactly who she was. He had recognized the handwriting on that whiteboard because he'd seen it before, on papers he and Wallace had dissected long ago. Her humiliation had been deliberate. His laughter wasn't mockery of a janitor. It was punishment for a ghost coming back to life. Martha folded the papers carefully, her voice steady but her eyes burning. They've been building their careers on the work of people like me for centuries, she said quietly. They publish our ideas, wear our genius like borrowed suits, and then pretend we never existed. Elijah's throat tightened. Then let's make them remember. She met his gaze, calm but resolute. They don't remember people like me until we embarrass them. He saw something fierce in her then. Not the weary custodian who cleaned after others, but the scholar who once dared to challenge systems meant to crush her. You think they'll listen now? He asked. No, she said, gathering her cleaning rags. But they'll have to. She turned, pushing her cart down the hall, her footsteps slow but unyielding. The fluorescent light followed her like a silent witness. Behind her, Elijah folded the papers, slid them into his backpack, and whispered to himself, "This isn't over." The next morning, he brought the evidence to Dean Strickland. She skimmed the documents in stunned silence, flipping between the two research papers, her expression darkening with every line. "This," she muttered. "This could destroy the department. Or save it," Elijah said quietly. Strickland looked up. "You understand what you're accusing, right? A tenured chair, and a decorated Harvard scholar." "I'm not accusing," Elijah replied. "I'm showing." She hesitated, staring at the papers again, and then reached for the intercom. "Get Dr. Prescott in my office. Now." Elijah's pulse raced. He watched the dean's expression, a careful balance of outrage and calculation. She didn't care about justice. She cared about damage control, and that realization chilled him more than the theft itself. When the dean's assistant emailed the official meeting invite to Dr. Prescott, Elijah caught a glimpse of the recipient list and froze. The carbon copy wasn't just to Prescott. It was also sent to Dr. Peter H. Wallace. Martha Green didn't speak. Not to the reporters who now loitered near the campus gates. Not to the students who whispered her name, like folklore. Not to the university administrators who hovered with guarded smiles, offering support veiled as surveillance. She simply continued her shifts, pushing her mop down the same fluorescent-lit corridors, unlocking the same lecture halls, gathering stray coffee cups left behind by the same professors who now watched her with a wary mix of suspicion and disbelief. And yet her silence roared, because everyone else had started talking. Word of the discovery, the stolen work, the viral proof, the erased credit, had ignited the student body. What began as quiet conversations in dorm lounges and group chats quickly evolved into something louder. Handmade posters began appearing on bulletin boards and walls. Justice for Martha. She solved what they stole. Brilliance has no rank. Within 3 days, a protest formed outside the mathematics department. Students, led by Elijah and a few organizing voices from the Black Student Coalition, stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs and chanting in front of Prescott's office. Their voices carried through the hallways like thunder, bouncing off whiteboards and egos. Inside his office, Dr. Malcolm Prescott watched from his window with clenched fists. He had expected backlash, but not this. He assumed the story would die out, that the news cycle would churn past this minor drama in favor of something more sensational. But the silence from Martha, the absence of any denial or defense, gave the movement a purity he couldn't counter. She wasn't asking for attention. She wasn't crying out for justice. She was just being. And in a world where Black women were expected to either explain themselves or disappear, her refusal to do either struck harder than any speech. It humiliated him. At the faculty meeting that Friday, Prescott snapped. "I cannot work under these conditions," he said, voice sharp, rising above the murmurs in the conference room. "This environment has become toxic and entirely unprofessional." "Malcolm," said Dr. Ennis, a senior colleague, raising an eyebrow. "The students are asking questions, reasonable ones." Prescott scoffed. "Reasonable? They're holding protests based on rumors. You realize this is about a janitor, correct? We're allowing the credibility of this institution to be undermined by cleaning staff." The room went still. Dr. Patel, a respected mathematician and woman of color, leaned forward. I hope you realize what you just said.
Prescott backpedaled immediately. What I meant was,
You meant what you said, Patel interrupted. And we heard it. Silence filled the room like smoke. From across the table, Dean Strickland watched him with narrowed eyes, calculating. She knew the board was already watching him closely. His defensiveness, his language, his resistance to transparency. All of it painted a man with something to hide. And now Martha's name was being spoken not just in classrooms and protests, but in academic circles far beyond Jefferson Clark. The damage control window was closing. Back in the dorms, Elijah's room had become an unofficial war room. Stacks of papers, timelines, digital files, and hand-marked research citations cluttered his desk. His laptop buzzed with new messages every hour, from students, activists, journalists, and even a few anonymous faculty members who quietly dropped breadcrumbs of information. Martha still refused to speak publicly. She doesn't need to, Elijah told his roommate one night. They want her to defend herself so they can attack her. But if she stays quiet, she stays undefeated. What's the end game? His roommate asked. Elijah looked up, eyes burning with clarity. Truth. In a language they can't ignore. And the truth was spreading. A group of grad students created a public dossier online, mapping out the stolen credit trail between Martha's unpublished papers and the now celebrated works of Wallace and Prescott. The evidence was overwhelming. The theft wasn't just academic, it was historical. But while the student body rallied, the university tried to contain the fallout. Prescott circulated emails framing the protests as mob rule and accused Martha of creating division through inaction. He painted himself as the victim, a scholar under siege by an internet-driven witch hunt. His supporters, few but vocal, echoed his sentiment. She should have said something if she was that smart.
This is cancel culture.
Where's the proof that she wrote it first?
But the louder they spoke, the more they exposed their fear. Because deep down, everyone knew. If Martha had been white, if she had carried those same equations into a lecture hall instead of a mop closet, she would have been called a genius from day one. Instead, she was laughed at. And now, her silence was louder than any protest chant. On the fourth day of demonstrations, something unexpected happened. A small envelope arrived at Martha's locker in the janitor's supply wing. No return address, just her name, handwritten in neat block letters. Inside was a single piece of letterhead paper from the North American Journal of Pure Mathematics. It read, Dear M.G. Ellison, we recently reviewed the viral mathematical proof circulating within academic forums, and we believe it aligns with an unresolved submission from our archives dated. We are interested in discussing authorship credit and potential republication. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Dr. Helen C. Boone, Editor-in-Chief. Martha read it twice, her breath catching. She hadn't seen that name in years. The journal that rejected her original submission, calling it too unorthodox to be publishable. The same journal that gave Wallace a front-page feature for rephrasing her stolen ideas 6 years later. And now, they were reaching out. Begging. Almost. She folded the letter neatly, slid it into her pocket, and returned to her mop. At that exact moment, in a luxury office high above Boston, Dr. Peter Wallace adjusted his tie while watching footage from the campus protest on his phone. He recognized her immediately. He hadn't seen Martha since the mid-'80s, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. His hands clenched slightly. He'd known the day would come. What he didn't expect, what chilled him to his core, was how fast the tide had turned. She had no press team, no agent, no university platform, just one sheet of math, and silence. And still she'd taken the world by storm. His phone buzzed. It was an email from Jefferson Clark University. Subject, urgent. Meeting request. Martha Green. Citation discrepancy inquiry. Wallace stared at it, unmoving. He knew what was coming. Prescott's name was on the CC line. He poured himself a drink. Damn, he whispered. She's still standing. Just as Martha finished mopping the floor outside the lecture hall, her phone buzzed. It was a direct call from Dr. Helen Boone herself. The editor didn't just want a statement. She wanted Martha to present her proof at the International Mathematics Summit in New York. In 2 weeks. The next morning began with the sound of camera shutters. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the narrow entrance road to Jefferson Clark University. Reporters leaned against metal barricades, microphones ready, waiting for a glimpse of the woman the internet had already renamed the janitor genius. Martha Green didn't read the headlines, but she could feel them breathing down her neck. As she walked across the courtyard with her cart, every phone that tilted toward her felt like a weapon, each flash a reminder that anonymity, her only armor, had been stripped away. The leak hadn't come from a journalist or a student. It had come from within. Her personnel file, including her full name, age, and custodial role, had been anonymously emailed to 3 major media outlets overnight. The email subject line was short and cruel. Meet the janitor. Everyone's worshipping. Within hours, her face was everywhere. Cable news anchors debated her credibility. Some praised her as a symbol of hidden black excellence. Others questioned the authenticity of the math. Social media, always eager to divide, turned her story into a battlefield. Hashtags trended by sunrise. Mathma, stolen genius. Prescott Gate. On campus, chaos replaced curiosity. Reporters roamed the grounds, shoving microphones toward anyone who looked remotely involved. Students defended her fiercely, forming human barriers whenever a camera appeared near the janitorial wing. But even their solidarity couldn't drown out the murmurs. The quiet disbelief from older faculty, the veiled condescension in departmental emails using words like alleged and purported. The university issued its first public statement by noon. Jefferson Clark University is committed to investigating claims surrounding recent viral content related to mathematical research. We value diversity, integrity, and scholarship at every level of our institution. It was the kind of sentence that said nothing, but implied everything. Behind closed doors, the administration was panicking. The Board of Trustees was demanding answers. Donors were threatening to withdraw funding. A small protest had swelled into a campus-wide movement. Someone needed to take the fall, and Dr. Malcolm Prescott knew exactly who that someone would be. Prescott stood at the podium during the emergency faculty briefing, his face calm, his tone measured, his words perfectly rehearsed. "Let me be clear," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The viral equations that have circulated are undeniably connected to ongoing research in this department. However, they were written using privileged material from my locked office, drafts of theoretical frameworks not yet published." He let that hang in the air. A few gasps rippled through the audience. Others avoided eye contact, the discomfort palpable. In other words, he continued, "While I understand the temptation to romanticize this narrative, we are dealing with a serious breach of intellectual property." Dr. Patel rose immediately. "You're accusing the janitor of theft?" "I'm not accusing," Prescott replied smoothly. "I'm stating a possibility. Security footage will confirm who accessed restricted areas." "Restricted?" Patel shot back. "You mean the lecture hall you left unlocked?" Prescott's composure faltered for a second. "That's irrelevant." "No," Patel said. "It's not. You humiliated her in that same hall, and now you're implying she broke into your office. You're grasping." Dean Strickland intervened, tapping her pen against the table. "Enough. This meeting isn't about blame. It's about optics. The press is already on campus." Prescott looked directly at her. "Then optics require we act swiftly. If we let this narrative stand, the department's credibility collapses. My name, our work, everything we've built, gone." He turned to the others. "She took something she couldn't possibly understand. That's not brilliance. That's exposure to information beyond her grasp." The words hit like acid, and he knew it. He wanted them to sting. Across campus, Martha sat in the maintenance closet. Her refuge from the noise, the fluorescent bulb above flickered intermittently, washing her in ghostly light. She clutched the letter from the North American Journal of Pure Mathematics, reading it again and again like scripture. It was an invitation, but it also felt like a trap. She had dreamed of that moment her whole life, being recognized for her mind, not her mop. Yet now, standing in the spotlight she never asked for, she felt the burn of exposure more than the warmth of acknowledgement. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't open. Some offered interviews, others offered money. A few were ugly, laced with racial slurs and resentment. "Stay in your lane. You people love playing the victim. Someone's writing for you, aren't they?" She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears never changed anything. Instead, she whispered to herself, "You knew this would come. You knew." Elijah, meanwhile, was waging a quiet war online. He spent his nights fact-checking articles, posting screenshots, linking academic archives that proved Martha's authorship. His small dorm room had become a digital command center. Every post he made gathered momentum. Every thread he started drew hundreds of supporters, but for every message of support, there were 3 of doubt. People wanted her story to be a myth, because myths were easier to dismiss than injustices that demanded accountability. One evening, while scrolling through the chaos, Elijah noticed something odd. A private account had started replying to threads defending Prescott. The username iRealTruthMathematica posted fragments of old math drafts and claimed they were from Prescott's lost office work. The handwriting, however, wasn't Prescott's. It was Martha's. He recognized it instantly. That same looping precision she used on every proof. Someone had leaked her old work online and framed it as his. He screenshot everything. Then he sent an email to Dean Strickland, attaching every image, every timestamp. No reply came. Hours later, the account vanished, deleted, erased like her name had been decades before. That same night, Prescott appeared on a televised interview. The studio lights softened his face, giving him an air of authority. Dr. Prescott, the anchor said, "You've been accused of covering up the achievements of a janitor who may have solved a foundational math problem. What's your response?" Prescott smiled politely. "I think people need to remember that social media thrives on fantasy. Genius isn't discovered in broom closets. It's developed through discipline and education. So you're saying she didn't write it?"
I'm saying, he replied, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Anyone can copy symbols from a board. The interview aired at 8 p.m. By 9 p.m., clips of his remarks flooded Twitter. By 10 p.m., students filled the quad again, holding new signs. Genius doesn't need permission. Discipline doesn't equal privilege. Prescott lied. Inside her apartment, Martha watched it unfold quietly. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the TV screen. Her face calm but her eyes distant. She didn't recognize the woman in the footage. She wasn't the shy custodian anymore. She was a mirror, reflecting every woman silenced, every black scholar erased, every truth stolen and reshaped by the powerful. And still she said nothing. Her silence had become her rebellion. The next morning, Martha found an envelope slid under her apartment door. The handwriting was shaky, familiar somehow. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. "You don't know me, but I was there. You were robbed once before. I can prove it. DF Cambridge." A small folded photo was paperclipped to the note. A sepia image of a younger Martha standing next to 2 men at a math symposium. One of them was unmistakably Peter Wallace. The other, standing half in shadow, was Malcolm Prescott. The sender, DF, was scribbled on the back of the photo in the same pen. Martha's pulse quickened. She turned the paper over again, reading the words until they blurred. Someone else knew. Someone had seen it happen. And now, after decades of silence, they were ready to speak. The note's final line, written in smaller letters, made her freeze. "I kept your original manuscript. Wallace never destroyed it." The note from Cambridge changed everything. For Martha, it was no longer about survival or silence. It was about truth clawing its way back from the grave. She hadn't heard the name Cambridge 1987 in over 30 years, and yet those 4 digits resurrected an entire world of betrayal and loss. Whoever D was, they held something she'd been told didn't exist anymore. Her original manuscript, the one Peter Wallace had claimed to misplace. But while Martha processed the revelation in private, the outside world had turned into a battlefield. The line between fiction and fact, genius and theft, had blurred into chaos, and at its center, Malcolm Prescott was beginning to fracture. In the week following his televised interview, Prescott's once impeccable reputation began to erode like stone under acid rain. First, it was the students. Mathematics majors, young, hungry minds, with nothing to lose, began comparing his published research to Martha's proofs. They created side-by-side breakdowns on Reddit and Twitter, highlighting glaring discrepancies. In Prescott's work, there were inconsistencies, contradictions, equations that looped back into dead ends. In Martha's, perfect symmetry, fluid logic. Her theorems breathed. His stumble. Someone posted, "Prescott writes like he's trying to be right. She writes like she already knows she is." That post hit 4 million likes in a week. Then came the faculty murmurs. At first they whispered in corridors, over coffee, between classes. Then they started meeting behind closed doors, quietly reviewing Prescott's publications. They found patterns, ideas reused, citations missing, unattributed graphs identical to older papers from other researchers. For years his reputation had been built on confidence, not competence. Now the cracks showed. And in those cracks, the truth began to seep. Prescott felt the shift like an infection spreading. Students who once greeted him with "Good morning, Professor," now avoided eye contact. Graduate assistants grew distant. Invitations to panels were suddenly postponed. But the worst wound came when his longtime collaborator, Dr. Ennis, withdrew his name from their upcoming journal submission. "It's not personal," Ennis said carefully, stopping by Prescott's office. "It's just the optics. Until the investigation clears, I think it's best to distance myself." "Optics?" Prescott snapped. "You think this is a PR issue? This is my life's work." Ennis didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time you defended it with evidence, not interviews." The door clicked shut behind him. Prescott stared at the closed wood, like it had betrayed him too. For the first time, the room, his sanctuary of books and plaques, felt smaller. The framed certificate from Harvard glared down at him, like a lie carved in glass. He poured himself a drink, the tremor in his hand betraying the composure his voice never would.
How?
He whispered, "Did a janitor undo me?" But deep down, he already knew. Meanwhile, the student protest had transformed into something bigger, something harder to contain. What started as handmade signs had become an organized movement, with hashtags, petitions, and speakers. Elijah had become its reluctant face, giving interviews on student podcasts and local news outlets. He didn't claim to represent Martha. He claimed to represent truth. In one viral interview, when asked why he cared so much about a woman who wouldn't even speak to the press, Elijah said simply, "Because she shouldn't have to explain what's already obvious."
That clip became a rallying cry.
Students painted those words on banners. They chanted them in marches. Faculty started to quote them in departmental meetings. The administration, however, stayed silent. Emails were sent to students urging patience and civility. Rumors spread that the university had hired a crisis PR firm. Dean Strickland called multiple closed-door discussions, each one ending in vague promises and no action. Behind the curtain, the board had split in two. Half wanted to fire Prescott quietly and issue a formal apology to Martha. The other half, mostly older white donors, argued that acknowledging fault would damage the school's reputation beyond repair. So, they waited. They waited for outrage to fade, for public interest to move on. They underestimated Martha Green. Late one evening, Elijah received a text from an unknown number. "Meet me behind the archives building. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. D.F." He hesitated at first, staring at the message glowing on his cracked screen. The name from the note, "DF," could it be the same person who sent Martha that letter? He showed it to her during her break the next day. Martha read it silently, her face unreadable. "Go," she said finally. "Some ghosts are worth chasing." When Elijah arrived that night, the air was sharp with winter's breath. A figure stood under the yellow pool of a lamppost, older, bundled in a tweed coat, holding a worn leather satchel. "DF?" Elijah asked. The man nodded. "Douglas Freeman. MIT. Class of..." He looked haunted, the kind of man who had spent a lifetime carrying someone else's secrets. "I was Peter Wallace's teaching assistant," he said quietly. "And I saw what he did." Elijah's pulse quickened. "To Martha?" Freeman nodded. She gave him her draft to review for peer submission. He told her he'd help her refine it. 2 months later, she was expelled, and 6 months after that, Wallace published her work under his own name. Elijah exhaled sharply. "And you never said anything?" Freeman's eyes dropped. "I tried. I wrote letters to the department, to the ethics board. They were ignored. I was blacklisted for even asking questions. I've spent 30 years regretting that silence." He opened the satchel and pulled out a weathered folder. "This is her manuscript, the one she thought was destroyed." Elijah took it carefully, trembling, reverent. The pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Martha's loops, her margins filled with tiny notes and corrections. The title at the top read, "Prime Field Distribution, Unresolved, by Martha Green Ellison." "Why now?" Elijah asked. Freeman's voice cracked. "Because I saw the news. I saw her face, and I realized she's still fighting alone." Elijah nodded, tears burning behind his eyes. "Not anymore." The next morning, Elijah met Martha in the empty lecture hall, where it had all begun. The morning light spilled through the tall windows, catching the dust motes in quiet dance. When she saw the folder, she froze. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. "This can't be." It's yours, Elijah said softly. All of it. She sat down slowly, flipping through the pages. Her handwriting looked foreign to her now, like a younger self she'd buried long ago. But as she read, her lips parted in silent recognition. Every formula, every annotation, every spark of thought that had once belonged to her was here, intact, alive. Tears welled in her eyes, and this time she didn't hold them back. For the first time in decades, she saw herself, not the janitor, not the outcast, but the mathematician she was always meant to be. And she realized the lie was finally beginning to rot. Across campus, the administration held another emergency meeting. Dean Strickland sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members with tight smiles and tense shoulders. The optics are worsening, one of them said. Social media is exploding again. The MathMob hashtag has turned into a global academic discussion. Professors from Yale and Princeton are referencing her proof. We can't contain this. Strickland folded her hands. Then we'll shift focus. We'll emphasize our commitment to fairness. Issue another statement. People want accountability, Dr. Patel countered. Not PR. Strickland's eyes narrowed. Be careful, doctor. Across the table, a young faculty member spoke hesitantly. There's something else. Someone's been leaking internal communications to reporters. The room went silent. What communications? Strickland asked. The faculty member hesitated, then opened their laptop. Emails between the provost and Prescott, discussing how to manage Martha's story. Manage? Patel repeated. Or bury? The faculty member didn't answer. They simply turned the screen. The subject line glowed at the top of the thread. Containment strategy. Ellison situation. And there, among the chain of replies, was Prescott's message. Cold, detached, damning. We need to ensure no formal acknowledgement of authorship. The public will forget soon enough. Truth fades faster than rumor. Within hours, those same emails appeared on every major news outlet, leaked by an anonymous faculty whistleblower. Jefferson Clark's cover-up was no longer a secret. The emails detonated like a bomb. By the time dawn broke over Jefferson Clark University, screenshots of Prescott's internal messages had spread across every major platform. In-containment strategy trended for hours. CNN, MSNBC, and even the BBC ran segments on the leaked thread. What had once been a niche academic scandal had erupted into a national conversation about racism, institutional theft, and the invisible cost of erasure. And in the epicenter of that storm stood Martha Green, silent, exposed, and for the first time in her life completely visible. Her image now hung from dorm windows, painted on murals, etched in chalk on walkways. Students chanted her name through bullhorns, organizing walkouts and teach-ins across the quad. Campus buildings buzzed with impromptu lectures on systemic racism, black female erasure in STEM, and the long history of whitewashing genius. But visibility, as always, came at a price. Inside her tiny apartment off campus, Martha sat on the edge of her bed, holding a stack of hate mail that had begun arriving with increasing frequency. Most were anonymous, letters scrawled in shaky handwriting or typed and unsigned. The contents were familiar, predictable. Slurs wrapped in academic language, warnings masked as advice. You're not a victim, you're a fraud. They gave you a mop for a reason. Don't destroy a good man's name, just because the world didn't want yours. Some were worse. Threats. Veiled and explicit. She read them without flinching. But she kept every one. Elijah begged her to let the university know. To involve the police. But Martha had lived through this cycle before. Recognition followed by punishment. Attention that turned into backlash. And now the university's silence made it clear. They were bracing for the fire, not extinguishing it. Martha turned to Elijah one evening and said, with a calm that chilled him, "They won't protect me. I am the problem they're trying to survive." Across campus, the division was no longer ideological. It was physical. On one side stood the students and faculty who believed Martha had been wronged, silenced, and buried by an institution that prized power over truth. On the other, a growing coalition of defenders, tenured faculty, legacy alumni, and outside commentators who framed Prescott as a victim of mob justice and reverse academic discrimination. It began with a letter, titled "In Defense of Intellectual Integrity." It circulated among the faculty emails late one evening, signed by over 35 professors, nearly all of them white. The language was carefully chosen, but the intent was unmistakable. While we believe in fairness and justice, we caution against discrediting esteemed members of our faculty, based solely on speculative narratives amplified by social media. Malcolm Prescott has dedicated over 30 years to academic excellence and deserves the presumption of integrity, until proven otherwise. The letter hit the student forums like gasoline. Within hours, rebuttals poured in. Students publishing their own stories of classroom discrimination, patterns of biased grading, microaggressions, and outright racism in the math department. I got a C for using the exact proof a white classmate got an A on. Prescott once told me my math was too creative to be correct. They never thought we belonged here. This just proves it. The campus was no longer simmering. It was boiling. University security tripled overnight. Barricades went up around the administration building. Classes moved online for safety. Student leaders received warnings about unauthorized demonstrations. Professors were advised to avoid political statements in lectures. But nothing stopped the momentum. Each night the protests grew louder. Streetlights flickered above chants demanding Prescott's resignation, Martha's full recognition, and an external investigation into the university's handling of the scandal. Martha, meanwhile, remained out of sight. She didn't attend the marches. She didn't speak to the cameras. But her name echoed louder with every passing hour. Her mailbox, however, told a different story. One morning, tucked between a bill and a handwritten note calling her a diversity fraud, she found a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were printed screenshots of online threads, private forums where academics and self-described truth seekers debated how to discredit her. One post read, "If she's invited to speak in New York, she better not show. Accidents happen in big cities." Another, "She didn't write that math. Find someone from her MIT days who can say she plagiarized. We just need the headline." She felt her stomach twist, not from fear, but from something colder, familiar. She folded the papers neatly and placed them in her filing drawer with the rest. Let them dig. Let them reach. She wasn't going anywhere. Dean Strickland, on the other hand, was unraveling. The administration's strategy of silence had officially collapsed. Donors were threatening to pull millions. A trustee resigned publicly. A New York Times op-ed titled, "Martha Green is not your myth," accused the university of failing to protect the very person it had wronged. Strickland spent her days fielding media calls, drafting useless internal memos, and praying the scandal would lose oxygen. But then came the footage. At 5:37 p.m. on a Tuesday, MSNBC's lead story broke. Leaked security video shows top professor mocking janitor over math work. The anchor's voice was grave, the footage grainy but unmistakable. Prescott, in lecture hall B3, laughing. Not amused, not confused. Laughing like a man who believed power protected him from consequences. That board's not for recreational doodling, especially not by help. The anchor paused, then added, "That comment, now confirmed by multiple sources, was directed at Martha Green, the woman whose mathematical proof has sparked international attention." The footage went viral in under an hour. Within minutes, faculty inboxes flooded with outrage. The students who had wavered on the issue now saw it clearly, and those defending Prescott. Many suddenly found their names removed from the letter of support. At Jefferson Clark, the air turned electric. Protesters screamed louder. Chants turned into roars. Someone projected the footage on the side of the math building that night. Students gathered below it in silence, watching the moment over and over again. The laughter no longer echoed. It howled. Prescott did not appear on campus the next day. His office remained locked, blinds drawn. Rumors flew that he'd been placed on leave, that he was preparing a lawsuit, that he'd already resigned. The administration said nothing. But Elijah received a message that same night, from an unknown number. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming. Stay out of it." He showed it to Martha. She read it once and said, "They want fear. That means they're losing control." Then she added, "Let them watch me rise." And rise she did. While the university spiraled into chaos, Martha sat at her kitchen table, reviewing equations for the summit. The invitation from the International Mathematics Summit of New York hadn't been rescinded. In fact, they'd offered her the keynote, her own name, in full, in bold print. The world was finally ready to hear her speak. But she hadn't yet said yes. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to make sure, when she did speak, it would be the last time anyone questioned what she was capable of. Elijah entered with his laptop, his expression unreadable. "Martha," he said, "you need to see this." She turned, expecting another article or hate comment. Instead, he played her the footage. The one from the lecture hall. The laugh. The dismissal. The condescension. She watched it quietly. No expression. No breath. Then she turned to him and said, "Good." Elijah blinked. "Good?" She looked up. Now they can hear it too. The following morning, Martha received a certified envelope from the university president's office. Not an apology, but a formal request for a private meeting. Inside was a letter with one bold sentence. "We'd like to discuss an offer of faculty appointment, if you're willing to return as Dr. Martha Green Ellison." Jefferson Clark University had always taken pride in its image, a polished sanctuary of intellect tucked beneath golden trees and ivy-covered stone. Its brochures boasted Nobel laureates, marble lecture halls, and century-old traditions. But prestige, like glass, cracks quickly under pressure, and now it was shattering in real time. The leaked footage of Prescott mocking Martha aired across every major news outlet. Cable talk shows looped it on panels. TikTok edits layered his laughter over images of her equations. Twitter turned it into a cultural moment. "Burns Martha Matt." Prescott laughed. "Burn Jefferson. Burn." It was no longer a campus scandal. It was a national reckoning. The school's inbox flooded with outrage. Messages from donors, alumni, and parents piled into every department. Prominent graduates, hedge fund managers, authors, lawmakers began issuing statements, distancing themselves from their alma mater. "I will not contribute another dollar to an institution that silences black brilliance. I demand the revocation of Malcolm Prescott's tenure. Effective immediately. If Martha Green doesn't walk across that stage as a professor, I will walk away for good." The school's PR team scrambled. Lawyers were called. Advisors were summoned to meetings where every word was weighed like gold. The president, Dr. Miriam Langston, issued a statement the next morning that was intended to calm the storm. It did the opposite. "We regret that recent events have caused distress in our community. While we are still investigating the context of the footage, we reaffirm our commitment to fairness, integrity, and academic excellence." Distress? Context? The internet erupted again. Someone on Reddit wrote, "If someone spits on your crown and calls it context, it's time to flip the throne." The throne flipped. By midweek, protests spread to other universities. Students at Stanford, Howard, and the University of Chicago organized solidarity marches. Hundreds carried signs with Martha's face, not the viral headshot the media used, but a sketched version, crown of equations rising behind her. At Columbia, a mathematics professor canceled lectures and instead held a class titled, "Erased Women in STEM: The Cost of Intellectual Theft." At MIT, a small plaque was quietly removed from a wall bearing Peter Wallace's name. In its place, someone taped a printed page from Martha's 1986 manuscript with 3 words scribbled beneath it. She was here first. Inside the university, chaos hardened into fear. The administration now functioned like a bunker under siege. Classes remained online. Campus tours were suspended. Prospective students' families canceled visits. Even faculty members began working remotely to avoid walking through protest crowds. Donors began withdrawing endowments. The university's capital campaign, Clark 2025, was suddenly losing traction. Key alumni backers went silent. Event sponsorships were pulled. One tech executive released a brutal public statement. "My $1 million pledge is off the table until Jefferson Clark honors Martha Green and removes every trace of Malcolm Prescott from its halls." The administration's hands shook with every incoming phone call. They had gambled on the silence of a janitor. Now they were bleeding millions. Prescott, now unofficially suspended, retreated into a private estate on the edge of town. His name had become radioactive. His colleagues ignored him. His students turned in petitions demanding his permanent removal. He issued no statement, made no appearances. The press camped outside his gate. Inside, he drank and drafted legal arguments no court would respect. "I built this department," he hissed to his attorney one afternoon, pacing like a caged animal. "I carried it for 30 years. His attorney stared. "And now you've set it on fire." But the most devastating blow came in silence. Dr. Peter Wallace, the once revered figure who had stolen Martha's manuscript in the 1980s, released a quiet surgical statement on the Harvard website. "I was wrong. The foundational work attributed to me in 1992 was not mine. It was Martha Green Ellison's. I apologize to her and to the academic community." No denial. No deflection. Just an admission. 3 decades too late. Prescott watched the statement scroll across his screen, face pale. Wallace had jumped ship and left him to sink. In her apartment, Martha read Wallace's words with an expression that never changed. Elijah sat beside her, the glow from the screen reflecting off his glasses. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She stared at the screen a moment longer, then said, "He didn't do it because he meant it. He did it because he's scared." She turned off the laptop. "I don't need his apology. I need my name." That same day, a courier arrived with a black leather folder bearing the university seal. The note inside was brief, handwritten on gold-edged stationery. "Dear Miss Green, the Board of Trustees will hold an emergency closed-door session this Friday. Your presence is formally requested. We believe your perspective is essential. With respect, Office of the President, Jefferson Clark University." Martha stared at the signature. "No apology. No admission. Just respect the formal, polished kind, given when one's silence becomes more powerful than their power." She held the note like it was a bomb. Elijah leaned over. "They're panicking." Martha nodded. "They're asking me to enter the room they tried to keep me out of for 30 years. What will you say?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a calm that stung like glass, she whispered, "I'll let the math speak." Friday came with gray skies and wind that whistled like warning. Martha stood before the great mahogany doors of the boardroom, wearing the only formal outfit she owned, a long black coat, and her late mother's silver brooch. Her shoes were clean, her hands were steady. Behind those doors sat people who had spent weeks avoiding her, decades ignoring her, and a lifetime building careers on names like Prescott's, while hers sat buried beneath layers of institutional dust. Now they wanted to hear her. Elijah stood by her side, silent, respectful. She took a breath. The doors opened. Inside, 12 members of the board sat at a long gleaming table. The president sat at the head. Cameras were absent. The air was "Martha," the president began, standing awkwardly. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She didn't sit. "Not yet. I didn't come to be thanked," she said evenly. "I came to be heard." The president nodded slowly. "That's what we want." A pause. Then, from her bag, Martha pulled the original 1986 manuscript, yellowed, annotated, unassailable. She placed it on the table. And then she placed the university statement, the one that called her distress a misunderstanding. And then the footage transcript, the one with Prescott's laughter. She looked them all in the eyes. "This is your legacy," she said. "Now tell me how you plan to fix it." The boardroom fell into stunned silence, until one trustee finally cleared his throat and said, "We'd like to offer you full professorship, but on one condition: you must agree to keep the Wallace name on the published research." The words hung in the boardroom like smoke. "You must agree to keep the Wallace name on the published research." Silence followed, cold and suffocating. Martha didn't move. She stood, coat buttoned, hands by her side, the 1986 manuscript still resting on the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with curated politeness, the kind that weaponized civility to cloak centuries of exclusion. Across from her sat 15 members of the board, lawyers, deans, trustees, and department heads, each one measured, each one afraid to break rank, afraid to acknowledge what they were really asking. They didn't want justice. They wanted containment. President Langston was the first to speak again, her voice softening as if to dress the insult in silk. "Martha, I know it's not the ideal situation, but Wallace's name has international traction. The academic world will process this more efficiently with him attached. It's purely symbolic." Martha's eyes never blinked. "Symbolic," she repeated. "Like a noose." No one answered. She stepped closer to the table. The low click of her shoes echoed louder than the breaths they didn't take. "You want to offer me a professorship, a title, a ceremony," she said, her voice sharp but level. "As long as I let the thief keep the crown." The oldest trustee, a man named Harold Winslow, leaned forward. He looked like a man who hadn't apologized in decades. "I've been on this board 32 years, he began. "We've seen scandals come and go, but nothing like this. You've drawn attention. That attention is dangerous, Martha. For the university, for everyone here. What we're offering is security. For you, retirement, compensation, your name on future papers. Let Wallace keep the past, and we can give you the future." Martha looked at him like she was seeing something dying behind his eyes. "You already took my past," she said quietly. "And you expect me to sell my future for the price of your comfort? Winslow shifted in his seat. A younger trustee across the table, a woman with dark curly hair and glasses, finally broke her silence. Maybe we should listen to her first, before we make any more suggestions. The room turned to her, startled. She gestured to the files still on the table. Dr. Green, she said, using Martha's full title intentionally. Do you have something you'd like to show us? Martha nodded once. Without a word, she opened a separate folder, one no one had seen yet. Inside were 6 crisp pages of handwritten mathematics. Fresh, clean, unpublished. She laid them on the table one by one, sliding them like cards in a high-stakes game. The older trustees leaned forward, brows furrowed. 2 board-appointed professors looked confused, then stunned. President Langston blinked twice. It was a new proof, not the viral one, not the Riemann-based framework already famous online. It was something else. A solution to a lesser-known, but notoriously unsolved problem in topology. A problem untouched for 40 years. This hasn't been posted anywhere, Martha said. Not online, not on paper, not in a journal. She folded her hands in front of her. I finished it last week, after I got your invitation. One of the professors, Dr. Harwood, stood up abruptly. He walked over to the table, eyes scanning the pages, lips whispering through equations. No, he muttered. No, this isn't, it can't be. He froze. His eyes shot up. She solved it. Murmurs spread through the room. Dr. Harwood turned to the others. She just proved the Dyson-Heller convergence hypothesis. Someone gasped. Martha remained still. That proof, Harwood said breathlessly, was considered mathematically dead. We gave up on it in the 90s. I didn't, Martha said. I just didn't publish in places that listened. The weight of her words crushed the silence. There were no more smirks now, no polite deflections, just a room full of people realizing they had underestimated the wrong woman. Again, Langston tried to recover. This is extraordinary, she said, voice faltering. It changes everything. It should, Martha replied. But it won't. Not if you keep pretending Wallace's name belongs next to mine. She picked up the proof pages and slid them back into her folder. I don't want your hush money. I don't want a retirement package. And I don't want a title that comes stapled to another man's theft. She paused, then leaned in, just enough to make her words sting. I want my name. Alone. Winslow shifted again, clearly rattled. That might not be legally simple. I'm not asking for simple, Martha said. I'm demanding truth. Another pause. Langston looked to her counsel, then at the other board members. The room was cracking, not just in order but in loyalty. For the first time, it wasn't clear whose side anyone was on. And that's when Martha did something unexpected. She pulled out a small voice recorder, placed it on the table, and pressed play. Prescott's voice filled the room. The public will forget soon enough. Truth fades faster than rumor. Silence. Langston's hands folded tightly on the table. Where did you get that? She asked. Martha stared at her. Someone in this room gave it to me. Gasps broke across the table. Eyes darted. Faces flushed. One of them had leaked the emails. One of them had recorded the meeting. Langston tried to salvage control. This meeting is confidential. No, Martha said. This meeting is historic. She gathered her papers slowly. You have 1 week, she said, to issue a public statement correcting the record. My name on the work, Wallace, is removed. And Prescott formally terminated. And if we don't? Winslow asked. She looked directly at him. Then the next thing you'll see is this meeting on the front page. Later that night, in a quiet corner of campus, a figure sat at their desk with trembling hands. They inserted a flash drive into their laptop, loaded the audio file, and began uploading it. They knew what they were risking. Career, status, tenure. But something inside them, something that had remained silent for too long, had finally cracked open. They weren't just leaking Martha's confrontation. They were leaking the entire board meeting. Every word, every threat, every bribe. And when the file was done uploading, they sent it not to the student paper, not to a niche math journal, but to the Washington Post. The next morning, the board awoke to breaking news. Exclusive. Jefferson Clark board meeting leaked. Janitor turned genius shuts down decades of deception. The story included Martha's full audio, her second proof, and a bold claim from the whistleblower. She solved more than math. She solved the system that buried her. The morning after the leak, Jefferson Clark University was in free fall. The Washington Post article spread like fire through academia, social media, and every corner of higher education. Phrases like one of the greatest academic cover-ups in modern history and a masterclass in systemic erasure echoed from campus town halls to televised debates. And at the center of it all stood Martha Green. But the higher she rose, the harder the institution tried to pull her back down. Behind the stone walls of the administration building, a new strategy had taken shape. Not crafted in the open, but whispered between lawyers and policy officers, spun through legalese and plausible deniability. They would not fight her proof. They would not challenge her intellect. They would challenge her conduct. The university's legal counsel drafted a formal complaint accusing Martha Green of unauthorized access to restricted academic materials, including departmental archives and locked research labs. They claimed her discovery had been made using stolen drafts, obtained without consent. The message was subtle, not a direct accusation of theft, but a framing. She didn't create it. She found it where she wasn't supposed to be. In the official inquiry notice they wrote, "While Ms. Green's mathematical contribution is not under question, the methods by which this contribution was assembled, accessed, and recorded raise concerns over potential violations of campus protocol and intellectual property standards." It was a new form of punishment, one dressed in policy. The hearing was scheduled in the Academic Integrity Office, a sterile windowless room lined with gray carpet and laminated plaques. Martha arrived alone. She wore no suit, carried no lawyer, and brought only a folder of notes, not equations but timelines, emails, and her cleaning schedule from the week the proof had gone viral. Across the table sat 4 panel members, 1 ethics officer, 1 math faculty member, 1 university lawyer, and 1 neutral observer, a young man who kept his eyes down and his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Prescott, unsurprisingly, was absent. He had submitted a written statement, long, winding, riddled with implications, but no admissions. He referred to Martha's findings as disturbingly similar to his own drafts, and suggested that the likelihood of coincidental replication is mathematically improbable. The lawyer nodded solemnly. "Ms. Green, do you understand why you're here?" "I do," Martha said calmly. "Do you acknowledge accessing areas of the mathematics department not permitted for custodial staff?" "No." "Did you enter the private research lab on October 17th, the night the whiteboard proof was discovered?" "I entered lecture hall B3, which is routinely on my nightly route." "The lab?" "No." "Do you deny using or viewing Dr. Prescott's notes?" "I've never seen Dr. Prescott's notes," Martha replied, "but I've seen his lectures. That's where the errors usually begin." A slight pause. Even the neutral observer let a breath slip from his nose. Not quite a laugh, but the ghost of one. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We have conflicting reports suggesting keycard activity in the math lab late that evening." "Then you should check the logs," Martha said. "Not the assumptions." That silence returned, that pregnant pause that always followed her honesty. She reached into her folder and slid a copy of her shift schedule across the table. "I was in the lecture hall from 8:14 p.m. to 9:02 p.m. I signed off, returned my keys, and left. The lab is locked from the outside and requires a department-issued keycard. I've never had one." The ethics officer scanned the paper. "We've requested access logs," he said. "They should confirm or contradict your claim shortly." Martha nodded once. "They will confirm it." Outside the hearing room, the tension on campus was unbearable. Students gathered in circles, watching live streams and news feeds. They weren't allowed into the inquiry, but they tracked every development like stock traders watching a collapsing market. In one dorm common room, Elijah sat with half a dozen other math majors, staring at his phone screen, his fingers clenched. "They're trying to bury her again," someone whispered. "No," Elijah replied. "They're trying to discredit her so when she wins, they can say it was by mistake." Just then his phone buzzed. An anonymous message appeared. "Check the logs. You'll know what to do." Attached was a file, time-stamped university server access records. Elijah's heart skipped. He read the entries. There, clear as sunlight. October 17th, Math Lab access, 9:14, accessed by Prescott. Duration 22 minutes. Next access custodial hallway, Green, M, 9:39 p.m. Not lab. He exhaled hard. They had her in the room after Prescott. She hadn't accessed the lab. He had, and she'd never been anywhere near it. Back in the hearing room, the university lawyer continued his calm attack. We acknowledge your claim of not accessing the lab, but until the logs are delivered, we must proceed with full inquiry protocol. Then a knock. The door opened. A student worker handed the ethics officer a sealed envelope. He opened it, pulled out the printed keycard records, and scanned the pages. For a moment, everything froze. The lawyer leaned in. Well? The officer looked at Martha, then back to the panel. According to these logs, he said carefully, Ms. Green never accessed the mathematics lab on October 17th. The room went still. The observer raised his head. The officer continued. However, Dr. Prescott did access the lab that night. At 9:14 p.m., he remained for 22 minutes. No one else entered until the building closed. Martha didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence echoed louder than any argument. The lawyer's face stiffened. Perhaps he was retrieving personal items. Or the ethics officer replied, he was erasing a board. There it was. Not shouted, not screamed, but spoken plainly, like truth always should be. Martha leaned forward slowly. I never needed his drafts, she said. He needed to hide mine. That afternoon, the university's press office prepared a statement to clarify the findings of the inquiry. Before they could finalize it, their servers crashed. The keycard logs had been leaked, this time by a different whistleblower, and shared by Elijah with every major campus blog, forum, and outlet. Screenshots flew across the internet. Prescott accessed restricted lab, not Martha. Keycard logs confirm Martha's innocence and Prescott's desperation. System tried to accuse her. Logs told the truth. MSNBC ran a headline at 6 p.m. MOP, Math and Malice. New evidence exonerates Martha Green. In her apartment, Martha sat quietly, watching the story unfold on live television. This time, the tears came. Not of grief, not of rage, but of relief. She wasn't vindicated by a committee. She was cleared by truth. And the truth had its own mouth now, loud, wide, and watching. At the same moment, behind the locked door of his estate, Malcolm Prescott poured his final drink. He saw the headlines, he read the logs, and for the first time in his career, he understood no amount of tenure, power, or white papers could undo what the world now knew. He hadn't just failed to erase her. He'd exposed himself trying. As Prescott stared blankly at his screen, a notification popped up. Jefferson Clark Legal Department has initiated formal proceedings to investigate academic fraud and misconduct. At the bottom of the message was a single name listed as the complainant, Dr. Martha Green Ellison. Vindication didn't come with applause. It came with headlines, data logs, depositions, and silence. When the university officially cleared Martha Green of all misconduct, their statement was brief and strategically worded. After reviewing facility access records and departmental evidence, Jefferson Clark University finds no grounds to proceed with disciplinary action against Ms. Martha Green. We thank her for her contributions and will continue to assess matters related to academic attribution. They never used the word apology. They never used doctor. But the world didn't need their permission anymore. Because outside the halls that once dismissed her, Martha had become something more than a name. She had become a reckoning. In the hours following the inquiry leak, Elijah created a GoFundMe page titled, Let Her Work, Let Her Lead. He posted it with one simple line. They hid her for decades. Let's give her back the time they stole. The page went viral in under 2 hours. Within 3 days, it crossed 7. By the end of the week, it hit $1.3 million. The comment section read like a confession booth for a nation long guilty of silencing brilliance wrapped in the wrong skin. For every girl who was told she was too loud, too black, too poor to be a genius. You're not just rewriting math, you're rewriting history. This is for my mother. She cleaned classrooms too. Teach us, Dr. Green. Martha never once logged in, but Elijah printed every message. He slid them into a binder and placed it on her kitchen counter. You should know what you've started, he said. She touched the cover, lips pressed into a line. I didn't start anything, she replied. They just finally heard me. Within the week, her inbox turned into a universe of offers. MIT sent a formal invitation for a visiting professorship. Stanford extended a tenured track proposal with full lab resources. NASA's theoretical division offered her a custom-built team and immediate clearance. Letters arrived from every corner of academic and corporate America. Tech firms, scientific think tanks, even the White House Office of Science and Technology. Each one addressed her differently now. Not Miss, not Martha, but Dr. Martha Green Ellison. Elijah read them aloud, laughing at some, stunned at others. One letter promised to name an innovation grant after her. Another offered to endow a research chair in her name. Take it, he urged one night, laying out the options like trophies. You don't even have to pick one. You could pick 5. You earned this. Martha said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, I didn't fight this long to leave someone else behind. He looked confused. What do you mean? She lifted her gaze. They want me because they see my name trending. But what about the next girl? The one mopping a hallway right now, humming equations no one will ever hear. Elijah said nothing. He didn't need to. Her silence was louder than victory. She turned every offer down. Graciously, quietly, firmly. She thanked them. She praised their intentions. But she declined every position, every lecture circuit, every honor they tried to place like medals on a woman who'd already won without them. She didn't want to perform brilliance. She wanted to build it. Then, during a quiet Friday press conference outside her old janitor locker, not a podium, not a stage, she made her first public statement. She didn't read from notes. She didn't wear a suit. She wore her uniform. My name is Dr. Martha Green Ellison, she said. I've worked in this building longer than any of you have been students. I've cleaned your floors. I've erased your boards. I've listened to your lectures through closed doors, and then gone home to rewrite them the way they should have been taught. A pause. I was never invisible. You just never looked. The cameras clicked. Phones rose. But I'm not here to relive what was stolen. I'm here to reclaim what comes next. Then, calmly, clearly, I will be returning to Jefferson Clark University. Not as a custodian, but as faculty. Gasps echoed across the crowd. I'm not coming back to learn, she said. I'm coming back to teach. Reporters shouted questions. Students broke into cheers. Professors turned pale. But Martha didn't flinch. She simply stepped back and walked away, past the halls she once swept, toward the future they once refused to give her. Inside the president's office, chaos erupted again. Langston slammed the report she'd been reading on her desk. She's coming back? She said, stunned. That wasn't part of the deal. She didn't sign any deal, her assistant replied. And the faculty senate just voted 93 to appoint her as visiting professor for the spring semester. The students petitioned for it, and faculty backed it. Langston's jaw clenched. This isn't about her qualifications anymore. It's about optics. That's exactly why they voted for her, the assistant said quietly. Langston stared out the window. Martha Green wasn't just returning. She was rewriting the institution. From the inside. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. Back at her apartment, Martha sat alone that night, reading an old letter she had tucked away in the back of her closet for years. It was the last correspondence she received from MIT after her expulsion in 1986. A cold, mechanical denial of her appeal. No apology, no signature. She folded it once, slowly, and slipped it into the trash. Then she opened a blank notebook. At the top of the page she wrote, Proof and Prejudice. Lecture 1. Below it she began to sketch a new kind of curriculum. Not just theorems but truth. Not just equations, but context. She imagined her students' faces. The ones who would sit in a room they never thought they'd belong in. Taught by someone they'd never imagined could be real. A woman with chalk on her hands. And history on her back. A mind unbent. A legacy unbroken. She smiled softly. They would expect her to lecture about prime fields and distributions. But first, she'd teach them how to see what the world had taught them to overlook. That same evening, a letter slipped under her door. No envelope, just a single handwritten page. It read, We're watching your rise. You took our spotlight. You won't be safe in front of that class. Winter came late to Jefferson Clark. The trees outside the mathematics building stood bare and trembling, their branches brittle against gray skies. Snow dusted the stone steps like chalk, just enough to remind everyone that seasons, like truths, could change without warning. Inside lecture hall, E3, the chairs had been rearranged. The whiteboard was wiped clean. The nameplate above the podium no longer read Prescott. It read Dr. Martha Green Ellison. The first day of her class arrived like a heartbeat after silence. It wasn't just a lecture, it was a return. Not to prove anything, but to finish something. Proof and Prejudice. That's what she named the course. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. And it wasn't for show. It was truth measured and permanent. like an equation that balanced long after the noise was gone. The syllabus wasn't just math. It was liberation. Linear algebra woven with the history of stolen credit. Number theory, next to case studies of racial bias and peer review. A full unit on how marginalized minds reshaped science from the margins and were erased from the center. Enrollment filled in 22 minutes. The university had planned to cap the course at 40 students. They got 216 requests. Even the overflow list had a wait list. They moved the class to a larger hall, but Martha refused. She chose lecture hall B3, the same room where Dr. Malcolm Prescott once laughed at her, then tried to erase her from the board. Now it was hers. On the first day, she arrived 15 minutes early. Not out of nerves, out of reverence. She stood at the edge of the platform, staring into the rows of seats that once swallowed her brilliance in silence. She touched the podium, now stripped of his name. Her fingers grazed the edge like it held a scar.
Behind her, the board was blank.
But not for long. Elijah was already seated in the front row, notebook open, eyes locked on her like a believer, at the altar. He had signed up for the class the second it opened. As more students entered, the room filled with the quiet energy of something holy. Phones were off, laptops dimmed. No one wanted to miss a single word. She turned toward them slowly and smiled. Not politely, proudly. "Let's begin," she said. Her first lecture wasn't about math. Not yet. It was about erasure. "How many of you," she asked, "have solved a problem and then been told you must have copied someone else?" Hands rose, mostly black and brown, mostly female, all familiar. "How many of you have been told you're brilliant, but not believable?" More hands. "How many of you have stayed quiet because speaking would cost you more than silence?" Silence. That's when she began. She didn't start with variables. She started with visibility. "Math is not neutral," she said. "It's taught that way, as if numbers can't be biased. But equations aren't just tools. They're translations. And who gets to speak them shapes what the world believes is true." She turned to the board and wrote, "Truth nail visibility. Genius nails recognition. Then, proof persistence."
That was the first lesson.
And no one forgot it. As her course unfolded over the weeks, word spread. Students called it transformational. Faculty called it disruptive. Media outlets requested to sit in. She declined every one. "I'm not a spectacle," she told Elijah. "I'm a professor." Her assignments became legend. She assigned problems with no known solutions, not to test success, but to test approach. She let students rewrite historical proofs from erased scholars. She made them submit one anonymous assignment each semester, to be graded blind, and then asked them to reflect on what it felt like to be invisible. Minds bent, eyes opened. She wasn't just teaching math. She was reteaching value. But outside her class, war still smoldered. The department had been forced to acknowledge her role publicly. A special page on the university website now carried a statement from the president's office. Dr. Martha Green Ellison's contributions represent the highest ideals of academic brilliance, resilience, and integrity. We are honored to have her leading our mathematics program this semester. It was too little, too late, but it was there. Still, not everyone celebrated. Some faculty avoided her entirely. Others whispered about quotas, optics, and overcorrection. And one, in particular, was preparing for revenge. Malcolm Prescott had been officially removed from the mathematics department 2 weeks earlier. The decision was quiet, labeled as an early retirement, but the real story leaked within hours. Emails, pressure from students, internal ethics findings. His reputation was now worth less than his silence. He had gone underground, but not away. On a Tuesday afternoon, a court filing appeared in the Jefferson County docket. Prescott v. Jefferson Clark University. The charge: wrongful termination and reverse academic discrimination. The language in the suit was venom disguised as reason. The university chose to dismantle my 30-year career in favor of appeasing political noise and social media activism. I was not removed for wrongdoing. I was removed for being white, male, and unpopular in a volatile moment. The media descended instantly. The story shifted. Now it wasn't just about what Martha had built. It was about what the institution had broken, and who was claiming victimhood in its ruins. That evening, Elijah arrived at Martha's apartment, face flushed. "He filed a lawsuit," he said, dropping the printed filing on her table. She read it silently. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't widen. She just said, "Of course he did. He's saying he's the victim now. Elijah added. That this is all about race. It is, Martha replied. He looked up. You think he believes that? No, she said. But he knows they might. He fell silent, and she returned to her notes. Across campus, protests resumed. This time, they weren't demanding Martha's recognition. They were defending it. Signs read, "We don't owe you back your throne. You can't sue your way into genius. Reverse discrimination in revenge for accountability." But the lawsuit had struck a nerve in parts of the faculty. A group of tenured professors released a new statement, not defending Prescott, but warning the university not to overcorrect. They used terms like merit-based tradition and academic dilution. They never said her name, but everyone knew who they meant. Martha, however, refused to be pulled back into the fight. She kept teaching, kept assigning, kept pouring herself into students who had waited a lifetime to see someone like her at the board. Until one day, after class, a young girl approached her, barely 19, eyes wide, backpack sagging with books. She said, "I saw your first proof on Reddit." Martha smiled gently. "And I didn't think people like us could think like that." Martha placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've always been able to," she said. "They just didn't want you to know." The girl nodded, tears shining in her eyes. And in that moment, all the lawsuits in the world couldn't touch what had already been written, not on a board, but in legacy. Later that night, the university's legal team received a shocking subpoena. Prescott had named Martha directly in the lawsuit, claiming she had created a hostile academic environment. He was no longer just suing the school. He was suing her. The courtroom smelled of old wood and new fear. Reporters filled every bench, cameras waiting, just outside. A hushed buzz ran through the room like static. At the center sat Martha Green Ellison, composed, quiet, resolute, her hands folded, her notes untouched. Across from her, Malcolm Prescott wore a tailored suit and the desperation of a man who'd built his empire on silence. Now, with that silence broken, he sat exposed, not as a scholar, but as a plaintiff. He wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting for the illusion of. The judge, a firm-eyed black woman named Honorable Teresa Blackwell, tapped her gavel lightly. "Dr. Prescott, please continue your statement." Prescott rose, feigning calm. "For decades, I built my department with integrity," he began, voice trembling just enough to suggest victimhood. "But I've been railroaded, cast aside for someone with no formal doctorate from this institution. I'm not here because of misconduct. I'm here because of political correctness gone mad." He paused. "I believe Dr. Green Ellison used my unpublished drafts, my original work. Her proof mimics my equations, my variables." "Objection," the university's lawyer cut in. "He's speculating." "Sustained," the judge replied. "Stick to verifiable statements, Dr. Prescott." He hesitated, then stepped down. The courtroom shifted as Martha took the stand. She didn't posture. She didn't flinch. She picked up one sheet of paper, Prescott's own published work, and held it up. "I'd like to address the claim of mimicry," she said. "Proceed," said the judge. Martha stepped to the whiteboard, installed for evidentiary review. With slow, deliberate strokes, she wrote out Prescott's signature equation, the one he claimed she had stolen from. Then below it she wrote her version. The contrast was subtle to most eyes, but devastating to the trained. "His equation is flawed," she said gently. "Right here, he assumes continuity without proving it. That gap causes divergence by the fifth variable." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Prescott's own legal team blinked. Martha continued, "My proof doesn't mimic his, it corrects it." She circled the deviation. "If I'd copied his work," she said, turning to the judge, "I would have copied his mistake." Prescott's face drained of color. But Martha wasn't done. "I didn't take his path and follow it," she said. "I saw where his path failed, and I built a new one." She stepped back from the board. Silence held the room. Then the judge spoke. "Dr. Green Ellison," she said, voice steady, "please remain where you are." Martha blinked. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge leaned forward. "This court has one more matter to address. Not legal, but moral, and I'd like you to hear it." The judge looked to the clerk, nodded once, and said, "Bring in the university board. This isn't just a trial, it's a reckoning." In walked the Jefferson Clark University Board of Trustees, 15 faces that had once offered Martha hush money, across a mahogany table. Now they took slow, hesitant steps into public view, every eye in the room tracking them. Some adjusted their ties. Some avoided her gaze. One or two looked like they had swallowed guilt and couldn't digest it. The judge addressed the courtroom, her tone sharp and deliberate. "This case is about more than civil liability," she said. "It is about a history of erasure disguised as tradition, and retaliation disguised as procedure." She gestured to the board members. "These individuals," she said, "represent an institution that failed to protect a mind like Dr. Green Ellison's, not once but for decades." The air thickened. Martha stood still, her eyes fixed on the judge, not on the board. She had already confronted them once. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about exposure. The judge continued, "We have entered into a rare moment where legal justice and moral clarity align, and for that, I find it appropriate to allow the defense one final witness, one who came forward only this morning." Murmurs erupted. The side door opened again, and in walked Dr. Judith LaRue, a retired mathematician from MIT, white-haired, dignified, and holding a file. She walked with a cane, but her posture was unshaken. She took the witness stand, swore in, and fixed her eyes on Prescott. "I was his doctoral supervisor," she said, voice clear, "and I've come to correct something." She opened the file. "This," she said, holding up a document, "is the original version of a proof that would later become Prescott's landmark paper from 1988. But it's not in his handwriting, it's in mine, notes I took when a young woman presented this very solution in an informal session at MIT." The courtroom froze. She looked toward Martha. "That young woman was Martha Green." Prescott's attorney shot up. "Objection."
Overruled, the judge snapped.
Dr. LaRue held up a second document. "This is the rejection letter sent to Martha weeks later. It claimed her work lacked academic rigor, and here," she tapped the MIT archive stamp, "is the time-stamped proving her version predates Prescott's by 9 months." Prescott looked like a man unraveling. The judge turned to Martha. "Do you wish to respond?" Martha shook her head. "I don't need to say anything else," she replied softly. The court recessed for an hour, and when they returned, the judge delivered her ruling. "Dr. Prescott's case," she began, "is without merit. His claims are not only unsubstantiated, they are built on deception, professional jealousy, and the misappropriation of genius he could not comprehend." She turned to Martha. "This court does not grant degrees," she said. "But if it could, we would award you one in courage."
Then, the unexpected.
"As an officer of the state, I have requested a formal motion to recognize Dr. Martha Green Ellison's contributions as exceptional under federal research impact law. I have also submitted her name for national consideration in the Presidential Medal of Science nominations." A gasp swept the room. Martha's eyes widened, but she didn't cry. She just breathed, deeply, like someone surfacing after a lifetime underwater. And then the judge spoke once more. "This court recognizes Dr. Green Ellison not as a custodian of floors, but as a custodian of truth." The gavel fell. Prescott collapsed into his seat. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of students had gathered with signs and chants. They watched the ruling broadcast live on a screen, then erupted into cheers. Inside, Elijah ran to her, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "You didn't just win. You rewrote the rules." But just as they stepped out into the hallway, a clerk rushed toward them with a sealed envelope. "For Dr. Green Ellison," he said. "Time sensitive." She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, plain typed, unsigned. "We were never after your equation. We were after your silence. You may have won the courtroom, but the war isn't over." Later that night, as Martha sat at her kitchen table, the envelope still open beside her, her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message. Attached a photo of her old janitor locker. The door was ajar. Inside, her original notebook. Burned. The sky above Jefferson Clark glowed with late spring light, and the campus quad had never been so full. Rows of white chairs faced a stage built beneath the statue of the university's founder, a man whose legacy no one mentioned anymore, not since students discovered the plantation that had funded his scholarship. Today that statue stood in shadow, because all eyes were on someone else. A velvet podium bore the words, "Honor, Truth, Legacy," and behind it stood Dr. Martha Green Ellison, dressed not in robes, but in the same navy blazer she had worn on her first day back as a professor. The president of Jefferson Clark, visibly tense but trying to appear proud, announced, in recognition of her extraordinary mathematical contributions, her perseverance against systemic barriers, and her service to both academia and justice, we bestow upon Dr. Green Ellison an honorary doctorate in mathematics and ethical scholarship. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Moments later, the Dean of Sciences approached the mic with one final revelation. In partnership with the Board of Trustees, he said, we are formally reinstating Dr. Green Ellison's name as the original co-author of the 1986 proof misattributed to others. Effective immediately, all citations and academic references will bear her name. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not in shock but in long overdue relief. And then came the final tribute. Next year we will unveil a statue in her honor, not just to immortalize her contributions, but to remind us of the cost of silence and the brilliance we merely erased. But by the time the announcement ended, Martha was already gone. She didn't wait for the standing ovation. She didn't care for photo ops. Instead, she slipped out the back of the stage, her honorary diploma tucked beneath her arm, and in her right hand, her old mop. She had kept it, not as a symbol of shame, but of resistance. Down the side hallway she walked, where the floors still bore scuff marks she once scrubbed away in anonymity. The same hallway where the board had laughed at her proof, where Prescott had once passed her without seeing her. She didn't walk to remember. She walked because some places hold truth better than podiums. As she passed the old utility closet, a figure emerged, a young black woman in gray coveralls, holding a broom. She looked no older than 20. Their eyes met, and the girl whispered, I saw what you did. I've been watching all year. Martha paused. The girl stepped forward, pulling something from her pocket, a folded napkin with numbers sketched in blue pen. I have something to show you. Martha unfolded the napkin. The handwriting was messy, but the logic was undeniable. A pattern only a gifted mind could have seen. Her fingers trembled. She looked up slowly and said just 2 words. Come in. Inside the old janitorial closet, the air was thick with memory. Martha reached for the light chain and pulled. The single bulb buzzed above them, casting shadows over metal shelves and half-used buckets. But in the corner she pulled over 2 stools, the same ones she used to sit on during her breaks, scribbling on the back of cleaning supply checklists when no one was watching. The young woman sat nervously across from her, arms crossed to hide the trembling. What's your name? Martha asked softly. Imani, she said. Imani Rhodes. Martha nodded. Imani. That's Swahili, right? For faith. Imani smiled shyly. My grandmother gave it to me. Martha unfolded the napkin again, smoothing it carefully on her lap. The equation wasn't polished. It was raw, clumsy in form, but the insight at the center was unmistakable. A jump, a conceptual leap that most graduate students wouldn't even attempt. Martha picked up a nearby pencil, circling one variable. How did you arrive at this expression? Imani's eyes darted. I work nights at the computer lab too. I've been watching your lectures online. Not officially enrolled, but I listen. And this one, the distributed field theory, it wouldn't leave my head. So I started sketching. Martha studied the notation again. You shifted the problem across dimensions. Imani shrugged. I just thought maybe if we stopped flattening the model and let it twist. Martha held up her hand gently. No need to explain. I see it. She didn't just see it. She recognized it. The same spark, the same quiet hunger, the same coded genius that academia so often discarded before it learned how to name. She had seen it in herself. Now it lived in someone else. That night, back in her apartment, Martha wrote 2 letters. One to the faculty committee, requesting that Imani Rhodes be given immediate admission to Jefferson Clark's accelerated mathematics track, with full scholarship. The second was shorter. It was addressed to Imani directly. It read, You don't need permission to be brilliant, but you'll have it anyway. Now let's sharpen it. She enclosed the letter in an envelope, placed it beside the mop in the hallway closet, and smiled. History, she realized, doesn't repeat itself. It waits. And sometimes, it watches long enough for someone brave enough to rewrite it. The following month, a bronze statue was unveiled in the quad, not of Martha standing in triumph, but of her kneeling on one knee, drawing an equation on the ground, chalk in one hand, a mop in the other. The plaque beneath it read, Dr. Martha Green Ellison. She didn't rise above the system. She exposed it, then changed it. People came from across the country to see it. Alumni brought their daughters. Students took selfies. Scholars traced her theorems beneath the folds of the metal sculpture. But Martha didn't attend the ceremony. She was already back in Hall B3, chalk in hand, standing beside a new whiteboard. Imani sat in the front row, notebook open, eyes alive. So did 10 others, all young, all underseen, all ready. Martha tapped the board once. No more erasure, she said, and class began. Outside, tucked in the pocket of the bronze statue, a folded napkin rested, on it yet another equation. Signed only. A new voice, a new mind. The proof continues. They tried to silence her with a mop, but her mind was louder than their degrees. She didn't just survive injustice. She rewrote it. If her story shook something inside you, type yes. If you believe brilliance has no color.